So firstly, thank you all for joining us this morning. We're really looking forward to sharing what we've found through our analysis of the year one TSM results. So any of you who don't know us already, myself, Laura, Holly and Will, we're here from IFF Research. We work within our housing team here and we specialise in housing projects. We provide research support across the social housing sector. We continue to work closely with all our providers to deliver the second year of the TSM surveys, which now unbelievably passed the halfway point already. It's been a busy time with the consumer standards, complaints handling code, TSM submissions, and the positive takeout that we've seen here at IFF is that there are clear signs that the customer voice is gaining more traction. And it's very timely today following the publishing of results from the regulator yesterday. So with the regulatory judgments now filtering through, incorporating the TSMs as part of that, we thought it'd be a good time to step back and reflect on what we have learned from year one. So we have an hour session planned for today, and we'll be covering our analysis at IFF Research for the first year of aggregated TSM data that we've collected. Then we've got Laura Ballantyne joining us from LiveWest to talk about their experiences and learnings so far. And this will be followed by a Q&A. So please do feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A functionality at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be monitoring this throughout and come back to this at the end. If you've got any other general comments throughout, you can also use the chat function to share any thoughts throughout the presentation. We'll be recording this session, and if you've got any questions that we don't get to or we don't manage to cover in today, we'll include our contact details so you can follow up with us. If you've got any questions and queries, you can always reach out to us following the session. So I'll hand over to Will to talk you through our analysis of the year one TSM data. But just before that, we'd like to ask you a couple of questions before we get started.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and before we get started, we've just got a couple of questions to understand who's joining us today and to try and make sure that we can make the session as relevant and as useful for you as possible. So you should see a poll come up now. And if you can answer these two questions. So what do you hope to gain from the webinar? And what is your primary role in relation to tenant satisfaction? Great, thank you for that. I'm going to crack on. That's really useful and will help us to make sure this session is useful. Right, I'll hand over to Will now, who is going to share our analysis.
So yeah, I'm just going to walk you through the kind of findings of these key insights from the first year of the TSMs, looking at LCRA and LCHO. And yeah, thank you all for coming today. So first of all, I just want to kind of briefly cover the methodology that we have done for this piece of analysis and this piece of work. And so first of all, we collected TSM data from 39 different housing providers that we work with over the 23-24 financial year. And we cleaned that data into a single file and used it as the foundation of our analysis. We weighted our data by region using the English Housing Survey results from 2023 to ensure that our data was representative of the total population. And we did consider weighting for age, but we found that our figures were actually broadly in line with these national statistics, so we elected not to weight on that measure. So in terms of what I'm going to go through with you this evening, today rather, is we're going to start off with an overview of the results, then a key driver analysis, and then a segmentation analysis. And those of you unfamiliar with those two phrases, I will explain them when we get to them. So beginning with the LCRA customer base, those key trends and insights from the first year. So this is the property demographics for LCRA customers that we interviewed over the past financial year. And these slides will be shared and the recording will also be shared. So I won't spend too long on here, but from left to right, we have kind of the profile of our regions that we interviewed, the stock size of the housing providers we work with, and then property type and tenure type there on the right. And then moving on to the LCRA, the people demographics. So from, again, left to right, we have the age, we have the gender, we have disability, and we have ethnicity. So all kind of very key, interesting areas. But again, this is just the profile. This is who we interviewed. This is where we have a bit more insight and interest. So this is the satisfaction by these different demographics, specifically the overall satisfaction. So that first TSM question. And yeah, on the left, I won't pull out every single figure, but the one I wanted to draw your attention to is that London figure against the rest of the country. So there's a kind of a significantly less likely to be satisfied if tenants are from London compared to just about anywhere else, was all of which were above 70%, apart from London by that 62%. In terms of the kind of rest on this screen, so we have tenure type here in the middle, and specifically we can see that supported housing and housing for older people performing a bit higher. That's and I'll get onto this on the next slide. It seems that it's mostly because of a higher likelihood of these residents being older, and age is quite a strong correlation with satisfaction, which we'll get onto shortly. But yeah, that's kind of a key trend by tenure type. On the right, we have that stock size, and we can see that actually it's the medium housing providers that are kind of performing a bit lower when it comes to satisfaction, whereas on either end, like the kind of very small housing providers and the very large ones also both perform quite well comparatively. And then finally, on the bottom right, we have that property type, and you can see the bungalow kind of houses and properties performing quite well, higher than average satisfaction. But again, that bungalow is mostly due to a higher likelihood of tenants there being older, and they have that kind of trend of higher levels of satisfaction. And this is seen on the left here. So this is looking at the people demographics and how that impacts satisfaction. And you can see quite an obvious trend there on the left with age, with that over 65 group, 80% satisfaction, kind of, and it just gradually gets lower and lower as the tenants get younger. So there's a kind of quite obvious trend there of the older tenants being more satisfied. In the middle, we have ethnicity, and also on the right, the disability and gender. And while there's some slight significant differences there, they are very minor and not kind of areas in which we think are impactful on overall satisfaction. There's just minor differences there of a couple of percentage points. So yeah, but it's still, these slides will be shared and you can look at this in a bit more detail if you'd like. Moving on to the TSMs themselves, specifically the LCRA ones. These are the questions I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with and our figures that we have. So from that first year of TSMs. So we can see, and broadly speaking, I want to kind of categorize these into two groups, which is coincidentally the top half and the lower half. So in this top half, we have overall satisfaction and kind of keeping properties in good repair, maintaining building safety. These are what we call our kind of hygiene factors. These are very visible, very present factors for tenants. They can very clearly see if that building is not maintained, if it's not safe, it's very visible. And that second half, these kind of more social, maybe more unseen values. For example, listens and acts, keeping tenants informed, handling of complaints. These are a lot more kind of harder to define, harder to kind of physically see, but these are very important areas. And kind of throughout this presentation, I'm going to kind of refer to these two categories of TSMs. In terms of the satisfaction scores overall, we can see here that building safety performs highest, kind of being treated fairly and with respect, also kind of very high. And then the lower score, handling complaints around 39%. And yeah, you kind of see this like the range, and overall satisfaction coming in about 71%. So yeah, that's a kind of brief overview of the kind of top line TSM results from LCRA customers. We also have some additional questions that we include in our TSMs, just because we think they're good questions and they gain a little bit more insight. So with customer effort, that's questions about how easy a housing provider is to deal with from the customer point of view. Is it quite easy to get hold of, or is it a bit more frustrating process? Trust is self-explanatory. It's how much they trust you as a provider. And in general repair satisfaction, that is the asked of tenants that haven't had a repair in the last 12 months, which is obviously a kind of qualifying question for people to be asked that TSM question. So this asks everyone's perception. And on the right, you can see we've included some key questions that are comparative to the theme. So you can see that listens and acts at 61% is similar to the trust score of 63%. And interestingly, the repairs in the last 12 months, it's about 73% compared to 64% for general repairs satisfaction. So that's the kind of some interesting comparison points for those extra questions that we include. And now I'm going to look a little bit about survey methodology. And so, yeah, last year we completed about 50,000 LCRA interviews, about 43,000 of which were done by telephone, about 86%, and 7,000 done online, 14%. And what we see on the right is these percentages, and this is the satisfaction score by these different methodologies. So we can see, first of all, that's 71% overall. That's our kind of baseline figure. We can see when we just look at the telephone interviews, it's actually sitting about 74%, a slight increase. And then when you look at the online interviews, it drops to 55%. It's quite a noticeable, significant statistical difference there by survey methodology. And there's multiple different reasons for why that is the case. First of all, there is what kind of the effect of the interview is what we call it. The human element of speaking to someone, and this is something that is kind of well known in all kind of social and market research industry, is that the physical presence of having someone on the phone talking to someone, it increases people's likelihood to give positive responses. People are more likely to say give a higher level of satisfaction when they're physically speaking to someone because it's that human connection. Whereas an online doesn't have that human element of the telephone. But also kind of the survey types are fundamentally different because an online survey is fundamentally an opt-in survey. For those of you unfamiliar, the way the online surveys work is that each month we send out a set of invitations for the survey and arrives in people's email box, and they can then click on it and do it if they so choose. That type of survey fundamentally leans itself towards kind of people with more stronger opinions, people who have something on their chest that they want to get off. They see it and they're like, no, I'm very frustrated. My boiler's not been fixed. I'm going to vent about this on the survey. And so then they give potentially a lower level of satisfaction. So online surveys fundamentally lean itself to more extreme opinions. Doesn't have to be negative. In this case, it is, but extremer opinions because it's for the people who really want to say something. With a telephone interview, you could catch someone who maybe if they saw it in their email inbox, they wouldn't do it. But if you ring them and you've caught them and they have 10 minutes free, yeah, I'm willing to share my opinions. And so you get closer to the, you kind of get people that maybe you wouldn't otherwise have reached. And there's no kind of right way to survey in this sense. Both methodologies are true representations of the customer base. It's just you end up targeting slightly different people, but they are all still representative of your customers. And you can see that in the way that which our housing providers that we work with approach the surveys. So you can see 16 of these 39 that we work with used a mixed method approach, whereas the remaining 23 used telephone only. So we had a mixture bag of approaches done by housing providers. And moving on to the effect of the time of year, really. So these are a couple of key questions in the TSMs, and we've plotted their satisfaction over time by quarter. And what we can see here actually is all of these remain consistent throughout the year. There was no impact, and this was quite an interesting finding because we hypothesized that perhaps maybe in winter the tenants might be a bit more dissatisfied because there's increased likelihood of damp and mold and areas like that. But we actually found that the time of year at which the survey was done had no impact on tenant satisfaction, which is a very interesting finding in of itself. So moving on to the key driver analysis. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, essentially a key driver analysis looks at the relationship between measures in a survey in this case and determines the relationship and how strong that relationship is when kind of comparing against one another. So in this case, we're comparing against overall satisfaction. So we looked at every single TSM question and we determined how strong the relationship between them was. So how impactful, if for example, in this case, listens and acts performs lowly, how likely is it that overall satisfaction also performs low? And we can see here's kind of, I guess, the ranking of the most impactful TSM measures on overall satisfaction. So at the top, we've got listens and acts, and then we've got a home being well maintained, and then being treated fairly and with respect as number 3. So this is very interesting because this shows us that it's those softer social measures that I was talking about earlier that actually what mainly drives people's satisfaction. And it's kind of a clear relationship. They want to feel like they're being listened to and that their landlord is acting on their behalf. And so that drives a lot of this relationship and satisfaction. So it's, just a very interesting finding. And it's interesting that when you look at the kind of how people respond to surveys just broadly in the industry, people will often say, if you ask people what's the most important thing to you, they'll say stuff like more tangible things that they can see. So I want my repairs to be done. I want my building to be safe, kind of those more kind of hygiene factors we were talking about. But if you look at a kind of key driver analysis in this case and look at relationship, you'll see that sometimes it's these softer measures, for example, listens and acts, being actually really driving satisfaction because they're frustrated about their repair not being done. But that's because they feel like as a landlord, they're not, or housing provider is not listening to them and it's not acting in their interest. So it's actually more about those relationship factors that really drive satisfaction. And it's important to note that the TSM measures that weren't on screen here doesn't mean they aren't important. They should obviously still be focused. It's just that this is kind of a ranking of the most impactful measures. And it's very interesting finding that kind of it's that softer touch, the relationship between housing provider and tenants that really is what drives this. And moving on to a segmentation that we did. So for example, to explain what a segmentation is, essentially it takes all of the data that we input and it groups them together, clusters them based on common trends and kind of profiles and builds groups. And that's what we've done here. And this is a heat map. So just to explain, the darker shades of green, they are kind of strong feelings of satisfaction. And then on the other side, these kind of dark oranges, reds, that's strong dissatisfaction with that kind of yellow, amber color in the middle being a kind of neutral, neither nor stance. And so, these are the groups that we formed and that were formed. And first of all, I'm going to talk through all of them, but we start off with this supportive group. This is 38% of the LCRA tenant population. And you can see here they are very happy campers. Everything's green and things are going well. And this is the majority of customers. This is good. They've got a good relationship with their housing provider. Property's in a good state. Things are going great. And then we move on to this content group, and they're 26%. So they're about a quarter of LCRA customers. And you can see, again, broadly speaking, everything's going well. There's still shades of green here. They are satisfied, maybe kind of slightly, they're not as quite satisfied as that supportive group, but things are going well for these customers. They're content. And you can see there's that, a slight shade of yellow there, more feelings of neutrality towards the complaints handling process. So there's kind of a slight dip there, but broadly speaking, everything is still, they are satisfied. And then we move into the next 3 groups. And this is where a kind of very interesting picture develops. So first we have this functionally content group. And you can see here at the top, they're kind of yellow on satisfaction. They're neutral. They're neither nor satisfied. But it's not a case that they're just kind of ambivalent across the board and that every measures they're neutral on. Actually, what's the case is you can see the top half of this chart is they're satisfied. There's green, and then the bottom half is actually a lot more orange, a lot more dissatisfaction. And this aligns with what we were talking about earlier with those soft social values versus those hard kind of very hygiene factors that you can see. And so this group, these tenants, their property is actually in fairly good state. They're satisfied. They think the repair service is fine. They're satisfied there. The building safety is good. Home maintenance, all around, the property itself is in a good state. But broadly speaking, they are not satisfied with the service they are being provided with from the social element to them from their landlord. You can see that listens and acts is a shade of amber, and that we just discussed how that is that's that big key driver of satisfaction. And then kind of very dark shades of orange for handling of complaints and positive neighborhood contribution. So we can see here kind of quite a clear, I think, distinct picture of these tenants. They've got a good property and they're happy with the home itself. But when you look at the relationship and what they expect from a housing provider, it's not being delivered in a way that they are satisfied with. And when you combine those two factors together, you end up with a group that are kind of neutral on the overall service. But then kind of you see this, what happens if the property falls into a state of disrepair, if the home itself is not satisfactory. And that's where we have this discontent group. And we can see now, yeah, they are dissatisfied. And you can see here, apart from this handling of antisocial behavior, they are dissatisfied with the service. The property is not in a good state. They don't feel like it's being repaired. The maintenance is not good. And so their feelings of kind of on the social values really have dropped as well. They're not satisfied. You can see this compared to the previous segment, a darker shade of orange. The listens and acts, that key driver, is really not performing well here. They are not happy and they feel like they've not been listened to. And then we move on to our final segment. And this is where, if that group of discontentment, if it's left to fester and grow for long enough, they become critics. And you can see here, this is dark shades of orange and red all across the board. This is strong dissatisfaction. These are your kind of harshest critics as a housing provider. And these tenants are not happy. And what this segment kind of shows us, I think, actually is a very strong connection between all of these groups. And I'm going to kind of take you for that. So let's say we have a critic and they are not fans of the housing provider. Everything's going wrong. They're not happy. Maybe they want to leave. All around, things are not going well. But let's say that, with a bit of effort, kind of an increased relationship between housing provider and them is met and reached. And they start to begin to feel that they are being listened to a bit more. Maybe they're actually getting responses in their eyes that are satisfactory to them. And it starts to kind of build up over time. It's not going to immediately bring them up to the supportive group, but maybe they become a bit more into the discontent group. Their feelings of dissatisfaction aren't quite so strong. They're still not happy, but it's a less kind of intense emotion and it's a bit more kind of subdued. And then a bit more effort kind of on their eyes is applied. And maybe some repairs are done. Maybe the property gets into a bit of a better state. And maybe they're in this functionally content group. The repairs have been done and now my home feels safe. I'm happy with the home. It's well maintained. That's good. But, it's the relationship between the housing provider and tenant. Maybe it's still not very great. They're still not happy with the level of kind of relationship they have. They want more. And so they've stayed in this functionally content group. But then maybe in their eyes, a bit more effort has been applied. And again, a more concerted effort to target these people. And now they recognize their property's in a good state. And actually, my housing provider, they're listening. They're trying to act. They're trying to improve things. Things are going a bit better. Now they're content now. They're happy with the service. And if this is sustained for long enough, suddenly they become very supportive. They really appreciate the housing provider and everything they do for them. And so I hope that kind of shows you how these segment groups aren't just distinct customers that are completely different from one another. There's a very clear relationship between each group and a kind of ladder that can be climbed, and you turning the possibility of turning your harshest critics into more supportive tenants. But likewise, you can see how maybe the more supportive tenants, if they're left long enough and they're kind of almost taken for granted, how they could slide down this ladder and fall down and become dissatisfied with the service. And so this segmentation was really interesting to produce and to see the results, to show that the kind of LCRA customer base is really quite interconnected with one another. And that's it for the LCRA customers, but I'm going to look at the LCHO customers now. And again, key trends and insights from the first year. So this is the LCHO property demographics. So again, as before, these slides will be shared and will the recording. So I won't spend too long on here, but we've got region, our profile for LCHO customers on the left, property type, and then stock size on the right. And then we've got the people demographics, and that is age, gender, disability, and ethnicity. So yeah, these are the LCHO customers that we spoke to in the last financial year. And as before, these are the satisfaction figures by these different demographics. And you'll see here on the left, first of all, as is kind of very noticeable and everyone is broadly aware, LCHO customers perform worse than LCRO customers. The levels of satisfaction are just lower. That is kind of a trend that we've observed and is, I imagine, very aware to everyone here today. But on the left, we can see some kind of similarities between LCRA and LCHO. So actually, you can see here again, London performs lower than other regions in the country. Noticeably so, 27% satisfaction for LCHO customers in London compared to around 50% for LCHO customers around the country. And then on the right, we can see stock size has no real impact on satisfaction for LCHO customers, and the property type, houses are more likely to perform well and flats are more likely to perform lower satisfaction. When it comes to age and people demographics, so age is an interesting one for LCHO, where it kind of actually is a very different story than LCRA customers. LCRA customers, to remind you, the older tenants were more satisfied. That's actually not true here for LCHO. And you can see that under 35 group is actually the highest performing group for satisfaction compared to other groups. And that is because we think they've just moved into this LCHO. Their property, it's the honeymoon phase. They're very happy. They're excited they've got this property. And so that's why we hypothesize they perform higher than other groups. And then on the right, we've got, again, ethnicity, disability, and gender, but you can see there's no real kind of stories of difference in satisfaction, very minor differences, but nothing that is kind of noteworthy in the sense of has a real impact on satisfaction. And this is the TSM questions for LCHO. Obviously, those key questions about repairs are not included because they are not included in the LCHO TSM. But you can see here in the background the different measures and the difference between the LCRA, which is in grey, and the LCHO satisfaction, which is in blue. And this is a kind of interesting story because you actually see a lot of parallels between LCRA and LCHO. So you can see that the measures that perform highest for LCRA are also the ones that perform highest for LCHO. So we can see here that building safety is the highest performing measure, as was the case for the LCRA customers. And areas that perform a bit lower, so the complaints, that was also the lowest performing measure for LCHO, as it was LCRA. And again, that key kind of driver, listens and acts of satisfaction for LCRA, which performed around kind of quite low compared to the other kind of engagement measures and all of these other kind of soft social measures, is also performing very low, comparatively speaking. And these are those additional questions as well. So you can see that customer effort and trust around 50% and 40% respectively, compared to the overall satisfaction at the top of 48%. And this is the key driver analysis for the LCHO customers. And it's a similar story again to the LCRA customers. So we can see that the listens and acts measure is that number one kind of key driver of satisfaction, shortly followed by being treated fairly and with respect, and then third, being provided with a safe home. And so this is interesting because the questions that kind of came out quite highly in the LCRA key driver, which was a lot to do with repairs and well-maintained after the listens and acts measure, are not included in the LCHO. So we see that when those measures are gone, the social value stuff and the relationship between tenant and housing provider is even more important and crucial for these tenants, with now these top two being social related, relationship related measures. There is still one kind of hygiene factor that provided with a safe home. That's still very important for the LCHO customers. But yeah, you can see a slight difference, but broadly speaking, the same trend for LCRA as LCHO in terms of what tenants care about. It's that relationship, it's these soft measures that they care about. An interesting kind of contrast to the LCRA one is the positive contribution to neighbourhood, which is higher, quite a bit higher for LCHO and is a key driver compared to LCRA, which was less important for an LCRA customer. And that is everything that I'm going to cover. I'm now going to be passing over to Laura from LiveWest, who's going to be discussing how they've been using the TSMs and how they found the first year of TSMs.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm the strategy and insight researcher at LiveWest, and IFF just asked me to pop along to just give some reflections on our key lessons that we've had from year one, and then also a bit of insight into how we've been using some of the TSM insight and data that's coming out the other end. So just a few things to touch on from our key lessons from year one. One of the key ones for us was around demographic data and gaps in our demographic data. So this is particularly in certain areas, but what we found is that where we've got limited demographic data, obviously it was limiting our impact to be able to look at the representativeness of our sample, but also any insights into some of those groups, understanding any differences in groups. So over the last 18 to 24 months, really, we've been doing some proactive data collection across both our rented and, well, across all customers, but rented and shared owners specifically linked to TSMs. So just to give you a feel, so we've focused really on two key areas where we, I guess, kind of saw some particular risk, but also where we had some big gaps. So one of them being disability, which we actually use support needs rather than disability. So what we've been able to do is been able to increase our gap there from 40% known data to 77% known data. And that includes where we know someone doesn't have a support need, so that's really key as well. And we've also been able to increase our ethnicity data by 6%. We were pretty good here, but it's still a great increase. Then something that actually links into what Will touched upon in a couple of slides previously. So one of the insights that we took from the first year sample was that ownership length seems to significantly impact shared owner satisfaction. So while we did sort of balance our sample by age, we found that ownership length was actually a bigger driver than age for our shared owners. So we've taken a decision this year to actually balance our sample for shared owners by ownership length as well. So that's just something that we've decided to do just based on what we found from our first year results. Will, if you want to pop onto the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So in terms of how we're using some of the TSM insight alongside our other data, so similarly to what IFF have shown us in the previous slides, we also ran a key driver analysis for us, and it's similar things to what Will was talking about. It's highlighted the importance of well-maintained homes, repairs, listening to customers, acting on them, and also proactive complaint prevention. So it's not just about handling complaints well, it's really about stopping complaints coming in where we can. So what we found is that's really helped us to kind of focus in on areas which can have the biggest impact on customer experience. And also from the key driver analysis, what we found was that whilst we pulled in sort of customer and property data alongside the satisfaction different questions, we found that the experiences through the questions were a much stronger driver than maybe some of our customer and property data. So really it's about the experience, those transactional experiences that is driving for us some of that satisfaction levels we're seeing. Something we do, sorry, Will, if you could back, sorry, cheers. Something that we do as well, we're continually tracking our satisfaction by the different demographics. So again, similarly to what IFF have done in the previous slides, and also, but where we have significant differences, just trying to get under that a bit. Why are we seeing differences? Where we can, targeting different actions on that. And then another one that we've been doing this year is we saw that our survey, the question on have you had a complaint, raised a complaint in the last 12 months, we found that our levels of people saying yes was much higher than potentially our formal complaints process. So in recent months, we've been investigating that by adding an additional question after those TSM questions to get under the root cause of why customers are complaining, what their perception is in that question. And a couple of initial indications suggest that actually there's a big link there with ASB and neighbour nuisance, but also repairs are a big big root cause for our renters and for our shared owners. We're seeing a lot of our customers around sort of communal areas and maintenance of estates as well. If you go to the next slide, Will, that'd be great, thanks. And then just a few more just to pull those out. So what we've found really key as well is actually we run transactional surveys alongside our perception survey. And whilst the perception survey, the TSM perception survey is a great kind of can opener, what we're finding is that our transactional surveys are giving us more of that real-time service performance. And it's really, we're trying to use them to complement that TSM perception survey really. So you can, whereas the satisfaction in the TSM may be a bit more lagging, hopefully you can pick up on stuff a bit quicker through our transactional surveys. Something else we've done is we have estate champions on some of our estates where we have communal services or estate services. So we've pinpointed where customers have kind of shown dissatisfaction levels, some hotspots, and we're looking to recruit some more estate champions in some of those hotspots. And then finally, something a little bit left field that we did was we incorporated our customer feedback from the TSMs for our development of our new strategy, which you know, obviously you'd hope most people would do, but what we also did is we conducted a bit of a gap analysis around where our customers' perception of those services are versus actually our colleagues' perception, to understand actually what do our colleagues feel how we're delivering our services versus our customers. So that was a really good piece of work, because it kind of focused our colleagues as well on some of those areas for our customers, also to understand where there's gaps, where colleagues maybe think we're delivering a better service than what we are, and in some areas where customers think we're delivering a better service than what our colleagues do. So it was a good, I guess, conversation starter and with colleagues across different teams in the business. So yes, that's kind of just a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things we're doing at LiveWest. And I believe I'm handing over to Laura now to kind of bring the session to a bit more of a close.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks Laura and Will. There's a fair amount to digest, but to summarise, from our perspective, some of the key takeouts. The data is really consistent over the year. We know that that's often debated, and anecdotally there's suggestions that colder months are worse for serving, but we didn't find evidence of that, and we thought that was quite, from a methodological perspective, that was quite an interesting takeout in terms of when you do your fieldwork. We know that the scores for LCRA and LCHO customers are different. We've seen that in the regulator data as well, and from the deep dive investigations we've carried out, and we know expectations are different and the relationship is different. Without the reliance on that more transactional servicing, those softer elements, softer skills in terms of servicing do seem to become more important in the key driver analysis that we've run. So clear comms on responsibilities for both parties, clear transparent comms around that is something that we see come up time and time again. And this leads nicely onto the customer segmentation that Will took us through, which further supports that the functional elements have to be right. Repairs are important. They do feature as a significant impact on overall satisfaction, but when we rank them, some of the softer things are up there as well. So getting the basics right is absolutely key, but those softer skills of listening and acting are also important, as shown in our analysis. So and through the work that Laura's shared with us as well. So that kind of takes us on to the Q&A. I think Sarah's got another poll just like to run before that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Laura. Just before we get on to the Q&A, we just wanted to find out a little bit more about how useful that session was for you and the information provided, and also what you'd find interesting in future, so that we can make things as useful as possible. So if you don't mind just answering a couple more questions, that'd be super helpful. We are a research agency after all. And in the meantime, if you do have any other questions for either the IFF team or for Laura at LiveWest, then do stick them in the Q&A function. We'll try and get through as many as possible after shortly.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for answering those poll questions. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion of our webinar now. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions that you have about the topics that we've covered today. If you'd like to ask a question, please just type it into the Q&A box, and we'll address as many as we can in the time that we have. If we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you afterwards as well. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A already. I'm just going to grab the first few. And we're going to ask our panel here today. So we've got Will and Laura from IFF, and then obviously Laura Ballantyne from LiveWest. So first question is from Jonathan Duffy. So he says that the LCRA key driver findings were really interesting, and the repairs service was much lower in importance than he was anticipating, based on past experience and also the results from the regulator's national tenant survey. Is this what you were expecting? So Will and Laura, that might be one for you to answer.
Yeah, I think personally, yeah, I kind of expected the same. With that repairs being kind of, let's see if we can go back to the slide. Here we are. Yeah, so repairs, I expected it to be higher. Personally, kind of from the experience of working day to day with the housing providers on the survey. I suppose well-maintained home is it's slightly similar, but it's not quite the same. So I was surprised by that. But the listens and acts, there is a very soft kind of link between those listens and acts and those soft measures, and then the repairs service. So like oftentimes it's kind of like they are quite linked. So that's like people may feel like they're not being listened to because they flagged a repair and it's not been done. So it's kind of they both kind of quite strongly correlate with each other. So while I was surprised that the repairs question itself was lower, it's still kind of performed quite highly in terms of the 4th out of kind of all the TSM measures. So I wasn't too surprised once I kind of looked at the bigger picture.
I think as well, it's probably worth mentioning here that we pulled out all the things that do have a significant impact on overall satisfaction. So it's not saying that repairs doesn't, it's just once you rank them, this is the order that it comes in. But as Will said, we often ask a follow-up after the listens and acts question, and like you said, it's hard to disentangle. Quite often it's about repairs, that when people aren't happy about the listens and acts. So there is definitely an overlapping relationship there, but overall repairs service is still important. It is a significant driver, but in the ranking, listens and acts came out top.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura and Will. So following on from that, actually, we have a question from Stephen Lau about the criteria for the segmentation. So, for example, the groupings like content or functionally content. Will, would you be able to talk a little bit more about those groupings?
Yeah, so it's essentially a segmentation analysis. It basically takes the data set and groups people together. So it's not, there's not so really a criteria in the sense of like kind of we pick up like we didn't pick these groups. We basically pulled the data into these different groups, and it created these 5 groups, and this was the results. And so we came up with the titles of these groups based on kind of the trends we saw. But yeah, we didn't really there wasn't really criteria in the sense of it was all the LCRA customers that answered every single answered the questions. So it was a case of kind of the bulk of the data really. Like don't knows weren't included, for example. They were kind of pulled out of the data. But aside from that, yeah, it wasn't really a criteria so much as just the LCRA customers that we had data on, and then the kind of software created these groups, basically, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. And Laura from LiveWest. I'm trying to be really clear because we've got 2 Lauras on today. So there's a question in the chat there that you might have seen about the wording of the question you've added into your survey to explore complaint satisfaction more. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually just looking it up exactly the wording, but essentially let me just have a quick look. I think it's something along the lines of what was the reason for your complaint. It really, what we wanted to do was, and I can send over the exact wording that we've used, but the focus really was on, we wanted to get under the root cause of that complaint. So why did they feel they complained? So yeah, it's just as simple as that, and it comes after the 2 TSM questions on the complaints to make sure that we stuck with the regulatory guidance in terms of your ordering there. So yeah, that's key as well, which I guess it kind of sometimes it can feel a bit odd asking for the reason after they said how satisfied they are, but at least then you know that you're not influencing that question that the regulator wants you to ask. So that's also key. But I'll just look it up and I'll send over the exact wording we're using. But I think it's interesting, just a quick one on that one. I think it's interesting how ASB nuisance is coming through. And obviously there's that later question on ASB and nuisance in the TSM survey. And I guess you could argue that, are we looking then at complaints satisfaction? I guess my view on it is, in the customer's eyes, they are still complaining about something. We technically call it an ASB complaint and not a complaint that you deal with through a formal complaints process, but it is in the customer's eyes still a form of being unhappy about something that's happening. So it's a really tricky one, and I wonder if the regulator will reflect on that. But at the same time, you know, I think there's still a lot of learning we can take from that. I guess for us, without that question, we wouldn't have known that. So it's probably a good one to explore whether it's something you want to get under in your business. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. And yeah, we've just heard from Jennifer as well. Awesome. So yeah, next in terms of the Q&A questions, Will and Laura from IFF, there's one about the 39 landlords that were included in the analysis. What distribution of local authorities and housing providers were there?
In terms of local authorities, we only work with one. We've talked to a few more actually this year who have been doing it in-house for the last 2 years or currently, and are looking at other ways of doing it. But we found a lot of that is done in-house, but we have one within our data set in this current 39.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. And following on from that, Jane asks about local authority providers and how do they gain feedback on tenants' views on housing services without other services influencing residents' views of the council? So is that something that's come up with conversations with the local authority, or is that something that they've managed to keep quite separate?
I think in terms of the TSMs, the questions are set and they have to be asked in that particular way. But this might be something for the group to take up as a discussion point for local authorities, particularly to see how they're managing that. But the question set is as it is.
Great. And then Emma asks, have you seen housing associations change the way in which they are conducting surveys for this new TSM year? And I know that's something that's in conversation at the moment for next year, but in terms of this year, have we seen kind of some key changes?
I think
we haven't seen a huge shift, sorry, Holly, in terms of how providers are conducting their TSMs this year. A few more are introducing an online stream that potentially hadn't had that before, or in their STAR or perception survey previously. A few more providers are looking to incorporate that. I would still say telephone is very much the predominant channel that we're working with and we continue to work with.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. And thank you, Laura from LiveWest, popping the question wording in the chat there so everyone can see it as well. That's really useful. Thank you. And then we have one more question in the Q&A at the moment. So anybody else who's got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A as we've still got a few minutes left. But Annie asks, have you looked at the data released on the government site to see that these figures still match using your same analysis?
We're just in the process, they've just been published, so we are in the process of reviewing that data in line with the 39 providers that we're working with. So yeah, we'll feedback once we've done that analysis and that comparison exercise.
Thanks, Laura. Great. So it looks like we're coming to an end of our time and we haven't had any more questions through, but please get in touch with us afterwards if you do have any more questions or want to open a discussion about anything we've touched on today. Yeah, it's been great to hear your thoughts and provide some insight as well. So I hope you found it useful. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found the session valuable and we look forward to seeing you at future events. And thank you so much to Laura for sharing her insight and lessons learned from the first year as well. That was really useful. So thank you so much for joining.
No problem, guys. I was going to say, if anybody wants to reach out to myself as well, if there's anything you want to follow up that we've been doing, maybe around our demographic data collection, please do. We're more than happy to share any of our kind of what we've been doing, basically. All right.
Thank you.